You make $95,000 a year. That's the part people would kill for. You know, because you used to be one of those people. When you were making 42, then 58, then 67,000, you ran the math in your head constantly. If I just got to 75, if I just got to 90, if I just broke six figures, everything would feel different. The pressure would lift. The choices would open up. The anxiety would quiet down. You got there. The salary is real. It hits your account every 2 weeks, and the number is everything you once said you wanted. And you're not free. If that sentence landed somewhere uncomfortable, stay with it, because what I'm about to walk you through is something almost nobody in your income bracket is willing to say out loud. The salary isn't the problem. The problem is what the salary quietly asks for in exchange. Right now, from the outside, you look like someone who made it. The apartment is in a good zip code. The car fits the title on your business card. The vacations get posted. The dinners are the kind your parents would have found occasion to mention for a year. But there's a number underneath all of that, a real number, a monthly number, that represents how much of your income was already spoken for before you open your eyes on the first of the month. And if you're honest about that number, and most people in your situation aren't, the math is not as flattering as the paycheck. This isn't a video about hating money or pretending success doesn't matter. It's about the single most expensive mistake high earners make, and why a bigger salary almost always makes it worse instead of better. Chapter 1. The salary that comes with an invoice. Here's what nobody told you when you got the offer letter. Every income level comes with a matching set of expectations from the people around you, from the culture you move in, and most dangerously, from yourself. When you were making $42,000, a studio apartment and a used Civic were invisible. Nobody looked at them twice. They were just where you were. At $95,000, those same choices started to feel like evidence against you. The studio feels like you're not serious. The Civic feels like a confession. The apartment in the cheaper neighborhood feels like you're not really doing what the salary says you're doing. So you move, and you upgrade, and you sign a lease that reflects the life the salary is supposed to represent. Currently, the median rent for a one-bedroom in a major U.S. city sits above $2,000 a month. At $95,000, that's $24,000 a year, about 30% of your gross income, before a single other bill. And here's the trap hiding inside the math. When you were making 42, you stretched for a $1,200 apartment and it hurt and you felt it. At 95, you stretch for 2,000 and it doesn't hurt, not at first, because the salary absorbs it. The salary absorbs the car payment too, and the new wardrobe, and the gym with the spa in the lobby. And the credit card that never quite gets paid off, but never quite gets scary either. Your salary didn't give you freedom. It gave you a higher tolerance for commitments you can't easily undo. That's not a character flaw. That's exactly what a bigger salary is designed to do if you let it. The income rises. The floor rises to meet it. And the gap between what you earn and what you actually need, the gap that is, by definition, the only place freedom lives, stays exactly the same or quietly gets smaller. Chapter 2. The promotion trap. There's a promotion waiting for you right now. Maybe you've already taken it. Maybe it's sitting in an offer letter you're still thinking about. The title is better. The number is better, 30, 40% better. The responsibility is real. The visibility is real. The company needs you in that chair and has made that clear in the way companies make things clear, which is with money. And almost nobody who says yes to that promotion does the second math first. The second math is not the salary. The second math is what the salary actually costs. Because the promotion doesn't just bring money. It brings the hours. It brings the emails that start arriving before your coffee is done. It brings the Sunday afternoon feeling, that low-grade pressure that reminds you what's waiting Monday morning. It brings a boss who needed someone for this role precisely because the last person burned out of it. It brings the expectation that your availability is part of the compensation. Currently, salaried employees working above $75,000 per year report working an average of 49 hours a week. Not 40. 49. That is 50 extra hours a month that are not showing up in the offer letter. So before you sign, here is the actual math. Take the raise. Subtract the extra hours at a fair hourly rate. Subtract the additional childcare or commute or dry cleaning or restaurant meals that come with those hours. Subtract the value of the thing you will quietly stop doing because you don't have the margin anymore. The workout, the side project, the Saturday morning that doesn't belong to anyone. What's left? Sometimes it's still worth it. Sometimes the number that's left is surprisingly small. And sometimes, if you're honest, it's negative. The promotion cost you more than it paid you. You just can't see it on the offer letter because the thing it cost you doesn't have a dollar sign on it. The salary is real. The freedom is not. Those are two different things. Chapter 3. The lifestyle that went to work. There's a specific version of this story that plays out quietly in every income bracket above $75,000. And it almost always involves a car. Not always a car. Sometimes it's the apartment, or the neighborhood, or the private school, or the renovation that seemed reasonable at the time. But it's usually a car, because a car is the most socially visible, monthly payment-shaped decision most people make. Here's what actually happens. You get the raise. You feel, correctly, that your transportation situation no longer matches your income. You upgrade. The payment is $480 or $560 or $690 a month. That number is possible. Not reckless. Possible. And possible is the most expensive word in personal finance. Because possible payments don't feel like decisions. They feel like the next obvious step. Nobody in the room treats a possible payment like something that requires defending. The question isn't whether you can afford it. The question is whether you can afford everything else once it's permanent. Currently, the average American car payment on a new vehicle sits above $700 a month. At $95,000 gross income, that is roughly 11% of your take-home pay. Attach a mortgage or a high rent to that. Add student loans, a credit card that carries a balance, insurance, utilities. Add the gym. Add the subscriptions. You are now a person with a very impressive paycheck and almost no room to move. This is what it means to send your lifestyle to work. The salary goes in. The obligations come out. And what remains, the actual breathing room, the actual ability to make a different choice next month, is smaller than anyone who has seen your apartment would ever guess. Chapter 4. What freedom actually costs. Here's the number nobody tells you. Financial freedom. Not the retire at 30 fantasy version. The actual version where you have genuine options about your life has a monthly cost. That cost is the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Not the gross number. The gap. A person making $42,000 who spends $36,000 has a $6,000 annual gap. A person making $95,000 who spends $92,000 has a $3,000 gap. On paper, the second person is doing better. In every way that actually matters for building options, the first person is. The size of the gap is the whole game. Not the salary. Not the title. The gap. And here's why high earners so consistently fail to build this gap, even as their income climbs. The income rises in events, a promotion, a raise, a new job. The spending rises in permanent ratchets. You don't upgrade your apartment temporarily. You don't lease the car for a year to see how it feels. The commitments are monthly, and they are automatic, and they are remarkably difficult to undo without something that feels like a step backward. What actually works, and it is almost aggressively boring to describe, is deciding in advance what percentage of each raise you will keep and what percentage you will let your life absorb. Not after the raise. Before. Because after, the raise has already been mentally spent. The new apartment is already on Zillow. The new car is already half configured. Before the raise, the decision is easy. You're not giving anything up. You're simply choosing on paper to let 20 or 30 or 50% of what you're about to receive run straight into something that won't ask you for more every month. After the raise, that same decision feels like restraint. It feels like you're denying yourself something you earned. And that feeling is correct. You are choosing. But the question is not whether to choose. The question is whether you're choosing deliberately or whether you're letting the culture around you choose on your behalf. Chapter 5. The scoreboard nobody sees. There's a version of your financial life that is completely invisible to everyone who knows you. It has nothing to do with your salary or your apartment or the car in the parking garage. It is not expressed in your clothes or your vacations or the restaurant where you took your parents for their anniversary. Nobody who has seen any of those things has any idea what this number is. The number is your net worth, not your income, not your spending. The actual accumulating number, what you own minus what you owe, that changes every month whether you look at it or not. That number is the only scoreboard that matters for the thing everyone says they want, which is options. Currently, the median net worth for Americans aged 35 to 44 is just under $50,000. The average is significantly higher, but averages are pulled up by people at the top. For most people in that age range, a decade and a half of working has produced less than 1 year of median salary and actual accumulated wealth. For a lot of people making $95,000, the net worth number is lower than it has any right to be given the paycheck. Because the paycheck never stayed long enough to build anything. It arrived, and it was spent, and the obligations renewed, and the cycle repeated. And at the end of the month, there was less left than there should have been, and the month after that was the same. The invisible scoreboard keeps score, whether you're watching it or not. The people who end up free are almost never the highest earners in the room. They're the people who, somewhere along the way, decided that the score on the invisible board mattered more than the score everybody else could see. They stopped playing the visible game. They started playing the invisible one. And nobody around them noticed for a long time, which is, it turns out, exactly the point. Chapter 6. The morning it changes. There's a specific morning that almost everyone who has done this describes the same way. It's not the morning after the big race. It's not the morning you hit some number you set for yourself 5 years ago. It's a Tuesday. It's ordinary. You wake up for a job you would not be afraid to leave, and you notice somewhere in the space between sleep and coffee that the noticing itself is new. A few months ago, that job felt like a requirement. The salary was the thing holding the whole structure together. The rent and the car and the subscriptions and a credit card that never quite emptied. And leaving it would have meant watching all of that wobble. So you stayed. Not because you wanted to. Because you had to. You don't have to anymore. Not because the salary went up. Because the obligations went down. Or stayed flat while the savings went up. Or because you spent the last 18 months quietly, boringly, without ceremony, building a cushion that is now large enough to give you a question you have never had before. What would I do if this stopped? The answer used to be scary. Now it's just a plan. That is what freedom actually feels like. Not a vacation. Not a car that makes you feel like yourself. Not a number with enough zeros to seem abstract. It's a Tuesday morning where the job is a choice and not a requirement. And you notice that, and you make your coffee, and you go anyway because you want to, and that distinction is everything. Currently, only about 40% of American workers say they feel financially secure enough to leave their job if they wanted to. Most people at $95,000 a year, most people at 120, many people at 150, don't have that Tuesday. The salary kept arriving. The gap never opened. The morning never came. Chapter 7. The one decision. There is one decision underneath all of this. One question that, if you answer it honestly and act on the answer, determines almost everything else. The question is not what to invest in. It is not which accounts to open or whether to max the Roth before the brokerage or what the market is going to do this year. Those questions matter, but they're downstream of the one decision. The one decision is, what percentage of your income do you refuse to spend? Not save. Refuse. As in, it is not available. It does not exist as spendable money. It leaves your account before your lifestyle has a chance to negotiate with it, goes somewhere it cannot be easily recalled, and works there quietly without requiring anything from you. That percentage, whatever it is, 10, 15, 20, 30, is the actual variable. Everything else is commentary. When you earn $40,000 and that percentage is 20, you are building faster than someone who earns $110,000 and that percentage is 3. The salary is almost beside the point. The percentage is the whole game. And the reason this feels radical when you first hear it, and obvious in retrospect, is that nobody sells you a product based on this idea. There is no upgrade to buy. There is no version of it that requires a subscription. There is no visible result to post. It just works slowly in the background, and one Tuesday morning you wake up and the numbers have shifted in your favor, and you have options you did not have before, and no one who knows you has any idea. The salary is real. The freedom is not automatic. You have to build the gap deliberately, 1 percentage point at a time, and protect it like it is the most important line item in your budget, because it is the only one that grows instead of just renewing. So here's what this actually looks like, stripped down. First, find your real number, not your gross salary, your actual monthly take-home, and your actual monthly committed spending, rent, car, subscriptions, minimum payments, everything that renews automatically. Subtract. That is your real gap. If it is smaller than you expected, that is the information you needed. Second, pick a percentage before the next raise arrives. Not after, before. Decide right now what portion of the next income increase will become permanent spending and what portion will go straight to the gap. Write it down. Tell someone if that helps. But decide before the money exists, because that is the only time the decision is easy. Third, automate the gap. Whatever percentage you chose, move it out of your checking account on payday before you see it, before your brain registers it as available. Automatic transfers do not require willpower. They just happen. That is the entire advantage. Fourth, leave the floor alone. Every time you upgrade your lifestyle permanently, the bigger apartment, the better car, the subscription that seemed reasonable, you are raising the floor. The floor is where freedom goes to die. Every upgrade that is truly optional should have to pass one test. Does this improve my actual ordinary life? Or does it improve the story I'm telling about my life to other people? Be ruthless about that question. Most upgrades don't survive it. Fifth, and this is the one people skip, spend without guilt on the things that actually matter to you. This is not a video about suffering. The goal is not to spend as little as possible. The goal is to waste as little as possible, which is a completely different thing. The things that improve your actual Tuesday, spend on those. Generously, without apology. Everything else is where the percentage goes. If this made you look at your income differently, even slightly, hit like and subscribe. We do calm, honest conversations here about building wealth without performing it for people who weren't actually watching. Before you go, one question for the comments. Be honest. If your paycheck stopped tomorrow, how many months could you actually live without borrowing anything? Not how many months should you be able to live. How many months could you actually right now? That number is the real answer to whether the salary is working for you or whether you're working for the salary. The salary is real. The freedom is not. And the distance between those two things is exactly one decision wide.